I'd like to invite Peter Scott, who is the podcast host of AI and You, and he has lots of other strings to his bow as well. And Peter, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, David. And I am going to show my presentation. All right. I am going to focus on one domain of artificial intelligence alone, and that's because there is one place where virtually every issue in AI comes together. Issues of creativity, bias, law, privacy, what I'll call cognitive autonomy, which is retaining our ability to think for ourselves versus abdicating some of that to AI. Intellectual property rights, economics, job loss and politics, and economics is capital leaving places where it is most needed and accumulating in places and among people who already have lots because they own the AI and sources of automation. The environment, our psychology, including things like misinformation spread by AI, tuned to our individual psychometrics, and equity. Will AI accentuate class distinctions between the digital haves and have-nots? And the place where all of these intersect right now is education, and that is what I am focusing my attention on these days and working with individual schools and larger organizations. It affects everything about education. The tools that we teach with, to what extent do we use AI in the classroom, in schools, as part of the tools that students use outside. It affects what we teach because the content needs to pivot to acknowledge the change in the world in every subject that is being wrought by AI. It affects the process of teaching, clearly the way that we approach it, especially assessment and homework is a matter of great discussion at the moment. And finally, it impacts why we teach, which is to say, what is the target that we are aiming students for in the world? What role are they going to inhabit? What do we expect of them? And this is immediate. These effects are not something that we need to wait a few years and speculate about. They're happening right now. In May, June, July, students will graduate into a world that's already fundamentally changed by AI. And what are we doing to get them ready for that in the meantime? How is education shifting? Education is not famous for pivoting on timescales of weeks. And I asked Sir Anthony Selden, who many of you know, on my podcast for an analogy or a metaphor to liken the impact of AI on education to something that teachers could get a handle on what the scale of that was. And he likened it to the invention of the printing press, which take on board that means we're not talking about a once in a generation or a once in a lifetime impact, but once in a millennium, far outside the experience of anyone alive. I do a lot, therefore, looking at the future of education, but my work also involves talking and thinking about the future of work, and I see these reflected in each other so much. And also, like you all, the future of humanity. And we deal in that on my podcast and other work as well. And these reflect each other so much. What we do in education in the next few years will shape the future of humanity. Those students will be taking on board moral decisions like deciding whether AI has become sentient and therefore deserving of human rights. So we have to get this right. One thing we're going to see in the next few years, in the next year, we will see institutional AI systems in schools where the AIs land like learning management systems that the students are engaged with. We're also going to see the failure of many schools and school systems that don't get on board with the changes that are necessary to deal with, for instance, homework. This is going to impact particularly in post-secondary and particularly in the United States, where you have a lot of diploma mill systems that have been optimized through extensive IT infrastructure to push as many students as possible through a model that's got as much automation as possible. But that is one where there is the most ability, opportunity for students to pass off AI generated work as their own and have it count towards their final grade, and B, the incentive to do so. We are also going to see a separation in the larger world of information work being hollowed out into trades, particularly physical trades, because robots replacing plumbers, hairdressers, masseurs is not going to happen to any significant degree in the next few years. And what I call the decision class, the owners of the companies that make this automation and the governments. And we've got to prepare children and students for that. We will also see a widening of cultural gaps between the digital global north and south. 1/3 of the world still does not have access to the internet. And so the benefits of AI in education in the West will not be felt in the third world. Now, working to ameliorate that are organizations like UNESCO, which is developing low cost and small models that can run standalone, large language models, that is, in devices that can be spread throughout the developing world. And you can listen to the lead author of their AI competency framework for teachers on my podcast in a few weeks. UNESCO has gotten, I think, largely ahead, slightly ahead of the next organizations that are on national scales, UK and US, in developing this kind of work. However, it's not going to work. That doesn't carry down far enough into school levels. So what we'll find is that individual teachers will set the pace at the school levels. This is what I found through many interviews and experiences in these places. And then the schools will follow with institutional policies, so the ones that don't fall into more chaos because their teachers aren't aligned, but it will not translate into larger organizations like districts or ministries. They cannot move fast enough. We will see student-driven innovation. The students, here I'm talking about the younger students, will do things that simply won't occur to older people to do with AI, like hyper-personalization. They will share everything about themselves with their AI assistants in what most of us would consider shocking breaches of privacy. They will also influence higher education and hiring policies as a block. So projects for London Futurists to prioritize, I would say, number one, involve students. Get them, reach out to them and involve them. When I chart the impact of AI by grade level, it peaks in 9 through 12, the high school years. And now on to the other questions. Let's have less. What do we want less or more of? I'm going to lead with less and more in that order. Let's have less angst about homework and students cheating. That's got to be solved, but it is a minor issue compared to what faces the rest of education, and yet there's all this hand-wringing about it. By the time schools, education has dealt with the real issues about AI, they'll look back and go, we were that worked up about the homework. And let's stop confusing education and the workplace. So let's stop the saying that students don't need to learn tasks that now that AI can do it. That isn't valid argument. Just because AI can now write essays about why Miss Havisham is so messed up in Great Expectations doesn't mean that there is no value to students doing that. Not because the world needs those essays. God knows we don't need any more of those. But because that develops essential skills that are transferable to other things. And let's stop trying to replace teachers with AI. And I put that in because I saw a news item about a school in London that was bragging about doing that. That is interfering with my message, and it's flat out wrong. But let's have more cross-sector engagement between education and research, government, industry, and media, so that the education pivots faster to meet the needs of those sectors as they change. And let's have more coordination between secondary and post-secondary institutions, so that high schools can get students ready for the new environments that they're going to face in universities that have pivoted to an AI-aware model. And because most post-secondary institutions haven't done that yet, this is why the secondary schools are in a quandary about what to do. And let's have more coordination between the terminal education institution, when the last school that someone goes to, and hiring bodies. And so I'm going to wrap up with talking about something that's inspired by the printing press analogy, because if you think back, and I have a view of history that's relatively untrammeled by actual knowledge because it was my least favorite subject, but I imagine
last few seconds, Peter.
The printing press caused some difficulty for teachers who were used to passing on oral histories, and then books took that away from them. So they pivoted to teaching intelligence. But now we have AI doing that. What's left and what's most important is inspiration. Books give us the what. AI gives us the how, but teachers give us the why. And nothing is going to replace that. That is where we need to focus our attention. Thank you very much.
That was super. I really like the ending. It's also the case that every serious discussion about the future turns into a serious discussion about the future of education. So let's now move to our tables for 9 minutes or so of discussion about what you've heard now, or you can continue some of the previous discussions if you like. Peter will be at the Meet the Speakers table. Thanks, Ian.